Hi, everyone. So this week, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to um, my lecture over section 3. We're going to break it up today. We're just going to look at two regions of the United States, the Northeast and the Midwest. And then the next recording is going to be of the South and of the West. Also this week, you'll have the study guide, and then you have to identify the different capitals of the United States, and then I'm going to have you do a map of the major cities and the study guide. But the study guide is not for a grade. I'm going to give that to you. Next week there will be a Kahoot. And then also the test over this chapter, chapter 6, and then we'll start on chapter 7. So let's go ahead and get ready or get to it. Okay, so if you look at the different sections of the United States, we divide it up into different regions. So today we're going to be talking about the Northeast, which is located right there. This is broken down into other subregions. You've got New England, and New England is basically from right here where we get the border of New York, and then in that you get the states of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, you got Vermont, you got New Hampshire, and then also Maine. And then here, these are like the middle Atlantic states of New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And then the Midwest, this is all those, remember we talked about perceptive regions. Sometimes some places are included in the Midwest and sometimes other places aren't. Sometimes like Missouri is considered part of the South, or North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas part of the West. But this is a way that we're going to break it up. The next recording we'll do the South, right? And then that will include also the West. So let's go look at the Northeast. Okay, so this is the Northeast. I told you it includes all of those. It's only 5% of the nation's land. That sounds like a good test question, maybe even a quiz question. Only about 20% of the population. There are a lot of people that live there, as you're going to see, that go basically from up here where Boston is all the way down to where Washington, D.C. is. So all along the East Coast right there, because you got Boston right here, you've got New York right there. So a lot of people, even though it's a small region, it's a lot of people of the United States. Okay, here's another way of looking at it. You got Maine, the capital is Augusta, New Hampshire, Concord, Vermont is Montpelier, Massachusetts, the capital is Boston. Down here at Connecticut, the capital is Hartford, and then Rhode Island, you have Providence. Okay, so normally what I do is I give you a map that you have to identify things, and then I use this to kind of go over it because we trade and grade, but we're not going to be doing the maps. I can't figure out a good way to make that work, so I'm just going to have to figure this out. All right, so let's go through the map, and I'm going to identify some things as we go through. Down there, this big boxy state, that is Pennsylvania, New York, right there. And then this is Vermont, right here. Then New Hampshire. There's Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, that tiny one, the smallest state. And then Maine, New Jersey, and I think that's it. Yep, that's all of them. Okay, some other things. Niagara Falls, we're going to be talking about, that's located right here. This is the Niagara River, and it's a very short, rapidly moving river this way, and there's a lot of rock in the area. It's broken down, so that's where Niagara Falls are located. So on the gray area across the river, that, of course, is Canada. Okay, Lake Erie, right there, and Lake Ontario. This is Lake Champlain, right there. It's right between Vermont and New York. The Erie Canal is located all along this natural valley in between the mountains. Whoops, right there. This is the Mohawk River, right here. That's the Susquehanna, lots of Native American names. So there's the Mohawk, and then this is the Hudson River. Now the Hudson River starts up here, Lake George, Lake Champlain, and it flows down here to New York City. So that's the Hudson River. My son goes to school about right there at West Point. Okay, this is the Connecticut River. It separates New Hampshire from Vermont, but it flows through the center of Connecticut out into Long Island Sound. There's the Atlantic Ocean, right? St. Lawrence River. Now, these are the Finger Lakes. They're these skinny little lakes that are located there in that part of New York, and they're called the Finger Lakes. This is Long Island. Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket are the two islands there. This is Martha's Vineyard, and this is Nantucket right there. And then this right here is Cape Cod. That's the Allegheny Plateau, part of the Appalachian Mountains. We also have the Adirondack Mountains. These are in upstate New York. You have the Poconos up there in northeastern Pennsylvania, and then you have the Catskills. These are located right here, oops, part of the Appalachian Mountains, but they're named something different. In Vermont, you have the White Mountains, or the Green Mountains, excuse me, and then in New Hampshire, you have the White Mountains. Okay, and then you have the Longfellow Mountains in Maine. Next, we're going to do the cities coming through here. There's Pittsburgh, and then Harrisburg, which is the capital. Largest city in Philadelphia, or in Pennsylvania, is Philadelphia. In New Jersey, you have Trenton as the capital. And then there's New York, where I told you it was, right? Albany is the capital of New York, up the Hudson River. Right? Montpelier is the capital of Vermont. Concord, the capital of New Hampshire. Augusta is the capital of Maine. The largest city, though, in Maine is Portland, even though it's not really that big. The largest city and capital of Massachusetts is Boston. Hartford is the capital of Connecticut. And Providence is the capital of Rhode Island. That should do it. Okay, so let's look at the history here. This is most of the people who first moved there moved along or lived along the East Coast. Europeans came in there, and this is kind of the gateway from the old world to the new. And the reason for it, there were great harbors, especially in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. And there's water that comes down from the Appalachians and it flows down. So this was very important for the Industrial Revolution, that when they put the water wheels there, and you have all these textile plants. Also, in this region, you have great fishing because we have the Grand Banks just off the coast of New England. Okay, so if you look at the topography of the area, you can see the mountains where I showed you before going through there. Here's the Allegheny Plateau. You have the Poconos, right? The Catskills, the Adirondacks, the Green Mountains, the White Mountains, and the Longfellow Mountains. Right in through there, right? So it's very hilly and it's very beautiful as well. You can see some pictures like that. There's also a lot of deciduous trees, so in the fall it's just beautiful. So here's some characteristics. This would be like an all the following except, right? It's very scenic. You got rolling hills, a craggy coast, historic sites, waterfalls, great hiking in the region. Okay, here's Niagara Falls. Probably going to make a video quiz where you're going to look at some of the videos that are on the PowerPoint. Okay, they also have good natural resources, right? So because of that, there's coal, there has been historically iron ore and oil. This is where the Industrial Revolution began. It started with textiles, but also they had petroleum, lumber, steel production in Pittsburgh, all sorts of things. Today, people are employed in like education, tourism, medical research, chemicals, that sort of thing. Farming is not very good there historically because the soil is really thin and rocky, except in Pennsylvania and parts of New York, it's good there. Now is part of what's known as the Rust Belt because a lot of these factories have shut down. Illinois is considered part of the Rust Belt as well. Okay, as I told you, these are the Grand Banks over here, this image to the right. In this area. This is fishing at its finest. We share that area with Canada, and so some of the best fishing in the world can be found there. So the fishing industry is huge. You can see a big fishing net right here bringing in their catch. Okay, the craggy coast I talked about, that's very important for uh, having good harbors. Because if you have a coast like this, then big ships can't dock right up there at the land. But if you have a craggy coast like this, you can get a big ship that can come dock right there, right? You got the sails up there. So it is easier for it to go very close. So we have some great harbors in the northwest. Here you have Boston Harbor. It's a good harbor. New York Harbor is an excellent harbor. And then here's another one of New York Harbor. You can tell the industrial aspect of it. And it's a leader in industry. These are those water wheels we were talking about. This fueled the first industrial revolution. They had abundant rainfall, very hilly terrain. So in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New Hampshire, this began the first industrial revolution, where you have all these textile mills where they created, made cloth, made shoes, and other products of that nature. Right, and this is the area where they had those big mills. Everywhere where you see a purple dot, that's where the largest representation of textile mills. This was in the 1830s. Okay, so what has grown from the region because of industrialization and um, I know government and people living in the area is what's known as a megalopolis, just this huge city that goes all the way, well, it's not a city, but connections of cities that go all the way from Boston down to Washington, D.C. And this is also the I-95 corridor. So the interstate that runs through all of those is Interstate 95. Okay, you can see this megalopolis at night, located right along the East Coast right there, from Boston all the way down to DC from that image. Okay, some problems though. Even though they do have a lot of water, they have a lot of people. So sometimes you have a shortage of clear drinking water. There's also they've had problems in the past with what to do with trash. There's been like barges and barges of trash, and they don't know where to get rid of it. Right? Pollution's also a problem. From the 1970s, they had a problem with declining populations, and when you have fewer people, then you're going to have fewer public services. But in recent years, more people have been going back to New York because it's safer and there's less crime, right? So that's been it's been increasing recently, but in the 1970s it was really decreasing. Right, New York City is there. It's known as the Big Apple. What some of you may not know is New York City is made up of all these different what are they called? You've got like you've got Brooklyn, you've got Manhattan, you've got the Bronx. They're boroughs of New York. You got Queens and you got Staten Island. So you got all these different regions of it. This right here is Manhattan. And in Manhattan, you've got Central Park, this beautiful park that is located right there in the middle of Manhattan. And you can kind of see it. This is it right here. All right, and it's kind of the cultural capital of the United States. It's got a very diverse population. It has since its founding. It was founded by the Dutch very early, like 1610. All right, and then this is Philadelphia. This was our main first capital. This is where the Declaration of Independence was written and signed, right here at Independence Hall, and also the Constitution. This is the home of my hero, Benjamin Franklin. I've had the opportunity to visit there twice, 3 times in recent years, go to Army-Navy football games, right? So this is like a historic capital of the United States. And then there's Boston, also very historic. They call it Beantown. This is where the Puritans first settled in 1630 and where the Revolutionary War was kind of centered. So you got the Battle of Bunkers Hill, which was right across, it was over here, right? So it wasn't really in Boston. Boston is actually a peninsula. It juts out here, and it's bigger than it originally was. They built out the city, kind of put stuff in the water to make it bigger. You also, this is the home of MIT and Harvard, just across the water. Okay, and then here we have the Midwest. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are the states of the Midwest, which of course we are part of, right? There are 12 different states here. This is known as the nation's heartland because of where it's located, and it's also called the breadbasket because agriculture is so important here. It's 1/5 of the land and a quarter of the population. It attracted a lot of European farmers here because of the rich soil, right? There's also a lot of waterways that are here and adequate rainfall, so it's very important. Okay, here, the Midwest, it was called that because it's the Middle West. Originally, it was the Old Northwest because the United States only went to the Mississippi River. Um, so it went to here, but then as the nation grew, it became the Midwest, right? And as I said, Middle America, nation's heartland, and our nation's breadbasket. Okay, topography, very different from New England, right? And the Northeast, it's flat. It's very flat. The only place where you might get some differentiation is down here in the Ozarks. And then over here in the Great Plains as they start to rise up to the Rocky Mountains. All right, if you look at agriculture in the Midwest. This is why we are the breadbasket. We've got very fertile soil, and the original vegetation here was prairie grasses, right? And so these prairie grasses were very, very tall, 6 feet tall, but then that also, or more, created very long root system. And that root system created a very rich soil. So with the rich soil, the good rainfall, and the flat land, it makes perfect territory for agriculture, right? This is a little bit of an older, this is about 2014, talking about exports and crops, right, from various states. So Illinois kind of leads the Midwest in export of crops to foreign countries, as does Iowa, or up there. We also have a lot of animal products. Iowa too, a lot of animal products that we export to other countries, but we grow here corn, wheat, soybeans. We've got dairy products, especially up in Wisconsin. You got you got meat, so there's cattle grazing, especially out on the Great Plains, right? So this is why we are the nation's breadbasket. Okay, so part of the reason why we're so flat is from that glaciation. It created that very flat land, left behind a lot of lakes as well, the Great Lakes, and then in Minnesota, that's the land of 10,000 lakes. Adequate rainfall. We get on average about 40 inches of rain here in Piatt County a year. So that's a lot of rainfall. And if you look at that, look at all these tributaries to the Mississippi River, right? All the different creeks and waterways that flow into other places then come into the Mississippi. So lots of rainfall, lots of water in this region. Okay, and agriculture is big. In our last textbook, it asked questions like grain elevator, right? Or, silos, different things like that. Does this town look familiar to anybody? That actually is Monticello, right? It's an older picture. This is the downtown area. Here's the courthouse, I think. Might be off, but it is Monticello. Okay, there's our cheeseheads, right? Our dear friends in Wisconsin. They got that name actually from people here in Illinois. So there's a variety of crops, and up in Wisconsin, they have a lot of dairy products. They used to be the #1 dairy producers, but now that is California. But there is a variety of crops, right? We have a long growing season. It varies though from one region to another. The further north you get, the shorter the growing season is. And it varies depending on the rainfall. But in Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa, this is known as the Corn Belt. There's also a lot of livestock there, and then grains out in the Great Plains, and then dairy in Wisconsin. All right, farms are changing though. What has happened, it used to be that just about everybody in the United States when we were first founded were farmers, but now it's only like 1%. The farms are getting much bigger, right? But the number of farms is decreasing, right? There's this huge link though between the urban areas and the commercial or the rural areas because there's big business in farming. There's food processing, the grain exchange, grain companies. ADM is one of them. It's a huge one in Decatur, right? Employs a lot of people in our region. So it's very important for agriculture. Agriculture is in this region. All right, so as I told you, the number of farms is decreasing where the size is increasing. This chart shows it. The farm population, there were 25 million in 1950. Just in 50 years, that number shrunk to 3 million, but the number of farms, there were 5.3 million, again, shrunk to 2.2 million. The number of acres, though, has really grown on the size of farm, the average size of farm. Okay, manufacturing has also historically been very important in the Midwest. Look at all of that in the Midwest and in the Northeast. This is known as the industrial belt, now kind of known as the Rust Belt. But if you look in Minnesota, they have iron ore. In Illinois and Indiana, an abundance of coal, also natural gas. In Michigan, that's where the home of the auto industry has been. So historically, this has been very important for manufacturing, but a lot of those manufacturing jobs have gone to other countries because the production cost is lower in those countries. Okay, if you look at trade and transportation, that's also important in the Midwest because of where the Midwest is located, kind of at the center of the country. It's a very important crossroads for transportation in terms of our interstates, our railroads, waterways, and then we have major cities too. The main one, of course, is Chicago, which right now is the third largest city in the country, but pretty soon, I think probably in the next census, it might show that Houston is larger. So we go New York, then LA, and then Chicago with a very close fourth place of Houston. Okay, so here what this shows is freight tonnage and mode. So this is transportation is in red by automobiles, trucks, and then the blue, those are from rivers. Coming down, if you look at the freight going down the Ohio River and then the Mississippi River, the more transportation you get, the wider it gets, right? So a lot of transportation, a lot of connections being made here in the Midwest and specifically in Illinois. We're kind of crossroads right there between north, south, and east and west. A lot of things coming through here. Okay, and then also between Canada and the United States, we looked at this before in Chapter 5, but we do share the St. Lawrence Seaway right here with our neighbors to the north, and then also we share 4 of the 5 Great Lakes with them. Lake Michigan is the only lake that's completely within the United States. But you can see we transport goods through there. Already talked about the St. Lawrence Great Lakes Seaway connecting all of those places through a lock and dam system, right? So I don't think I need to go into that anymore. We all know that I have this fascination with lock and dams. All right, and then here you can see some traffic on the Mississippi River. People travel from other rivers, the Illinois River, the Ohio River, the Platte River, the Arkansas River, all of these rivers to go to the Mississippi, which goes out to New Orleans, then which goes out to other parts of the United States or to the world. And then they do it on these huge barges, right? Like this one going down the Mississippi River right here. Just it could have coal, it could have grain, it could have any number of products that go through there, right? There's also, if you look at one ship, these are cargo ships, and then this is one barge, and then you look at railroad cars. So one ship would be the equivalent of 100 small barges, which would be the equivalent of 1,500 railroad cars, which would be the equivalent of 6,000 trucks. So all of these things are moving products from the Midwest, right? Through barges. And then from the barges in New Orleans, maybe then they're put onto ships and then they're sent out to other locations in the world. Okay, and then here is our interstate highway system. We talked about that before in Chapter 6. So you have Interstate 5 here. You have Interstate 95 going through here. Look at all the interstates that go through Illinois. I mean, it's just kind of amazing how it's just crossroads right there and through much of the Midwest. Okay, so all of these cities used to be industrial centers, but now many of those cities, they've shut down that and they're considered to be part of the Rust Belt. Notice how Danville and Decatur and Galesburg and Bloomington are included in that, right? So there's coal manufacturing too, that's in the blue. Those are places that had a lot of coal. All right, we have our major city of Chicago. Within the city proper, there's about 3 million people. Illinois' population is 12.8 million, but of that, the majority is in Chicago and the metropolitan area around there. So that's 9.5 million just in that. So there aren't that many of us in downstate, right? It's quite different. So far, as I said, it was the third largest city. That's subject to change pretty soon. All right, and then also in the Midwest, there are the Great Plains, right? My sister lives in South Dakota, and every now and then she'll send me a picture on her way to work. There's a bison in the road. We always refer to them as buffalo, but they're not buffaloes in America. They're buffalo in Asia. You can see some bison out here. I think they're bison, might be cattle. I can't tell very well. But the Great Plains are located right along here in the Midwest. All right, and then also part of the Midwest, we've got the Badlands, which are here in the middle. You got Mount Rushmore right here, and that's located, here we got the Black Hills area right there in South Dakota. Okay, and then you also have the Ozarks. These are located down in Missouri and then also in Arkansas. So you get a little bit of hills down in through there. Some of you may go vacation there in the summer. Okay, so that's it for these two regions of the United States. Next section is going to be on the South and on the West. Thanks for listening.